All right then. Hello, everyone. I know we're running a little bit behind. We're just trying to let some people join in. It's an honor to have you all join us here today. My name is Alan Bizaller, and I'm proud to lead the sales team here at BCPi. Our team is thrilled to commence this Tech Talk webinar series, where we will dive into the IT queries and concerns of our fantastic customers and offer non-vendor specific answers you seek. Our objective is to assist you in making the best decisions for your business, regardless of your industry. The only requirement for these sessions is an open mind and a desire to learn and share any burning questions. We believe that collective effort is the best defense against cyber threats. Hence, our goal is to foster unity and cooperation among IT professionals. By openly sharing our knowledge and experiences, we can pool our resources and enhance our ability to identify, prevent, and mitigate cyber risks. As you engage in this webinar, we encourage you to ask questions and contribute to the collective intelligence of the IT community. Remember, the more we learn from each other, the stronger our cyber security posture becomes. Before we dive into today's questions, allow me to introduce our company, BCPi and BCPi Synivate Services. Together, we provide managed services, email, and network security solutions to a wide variety of customers. Aside from network and email security, our areas of expertise include cloud computing, storage, server virtualization, and business continuity. We are proud to have a dedicated sales team here with us today who are committed to finding the best solutions for our customers' needs. Having been in this industry for over 30 years, we have witnessed the evolving threat landscape and have seen how organizations that neglect their security and network infrastructure suffer financial and reputational losses. Just this week, there was a ransomware incident that impacted Harvard Pilgrim, Tufts Healthcare, and their systems had to be taken offline. We are seeing these attacks day in and day out. In collaboration with leading security vendors, we provide a wide range of cost-effective and easy-to-deploy solutions that cover all your security needs. But while security is clearly a focus point right now, it is not the only thing we or you guys are working on. Cloud computing, virtualization, disaster recovery are just some of the other issues we deal with and will address in this and future webinars. For today's webinar, everyone will be on mute. As part of the collective collaboration, we are encouraging everyone to please open and use the Q&A box for comments, questions, and discussion. If we answer any questions and things are unclear, please absolutely use the Q&A. That's what it's there for. I also wanted to mention later today, we will be sending out a survey to get some feedback and suggestions from you guys. Hopefully you can take the time to fill it out and submit it. Thank you for joining us today. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Sean McGuire, who leads the Synivate Services team, who will kick off today's session. Thank you. Sean?
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. So I'm happy to be here today to address your questions and engage in a collaborative discussion about the topics that matter most to you, our valued customers. As Alan mentioned, the purpose of this webinar is to leverage our collective relationships and help bring awareness to important topics related to technology and cybersecurity. For those who may not be acquainted with our managed services, we offer a comprehensive managed IT service solution tailored for SMBs, and our packages encompass cybersecurity measures as well as daily support to ensure seamless operations. We can pop into the next slide. So, just pulling this up here. Before we dive into the Tech Talk Q&A, just want to give you a very brief overview of our managed service offering and what services we typically include as part of it. So really, we have about 5 main components here, and I'm just going to skim through these. So one of the main ones here is security. So endpoint detection and response, managed detection and response. Managed detection and response is a 24/7 operations team. So we're watching for these alerts to come in and we're reacting as soon as we possibly can 24/7. Firewall and security monitoring. This is important to stay on top of these logs. Security awareness and training, Cisco Umbrella web filtering and malware protection, dark web monitoring. This is important. Vulnerability scanning. And we move on to monitoring, server hardware monitoring, application service monitoring, making sure those SQL services are running on your servers, workstation and laptop hardware monitoring, network monitoring. Moving on to management and DR, Windows patch management, third-party patching, server maintenance tasks, workstation backup through OneDrive, and then, of course, support, help desk support, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and then 24/7 outage support for those emergency and critical issues, and then on-site support after remote diagnosis for break fix issues. Typically, under 2 hours is our standard response, initial response, and less than an hour for the critical outage first response. We also offer a dedicated VCIO, so we meet on a quarterly basis and really go through your entire infrastructure and perform those routine health checks to make sure that we're on the same page and we basically know what the initiatives are and we agree on what we're going to work on over the next quarter. Change requests, onboarding, offboarding. We pride ourselves in having a strong process-driven approach. So we'll make sure that we have a process for managing those on and offboardings, inventorying your laptops, asset tagging, warehousing the laptops, getting them out to remote users and to your primary business locations, swapping out workstations, and then your everyday, access and permissions changes. So this is our managed service offering at a very high level. And we just wanted to take an opportunity to make sure those of you who may not have been aware of this had an opportunity to see it. So feel free to take a look at this throughout the webinar here. So I think we can move on to our Q&A, which this is the whole point of us being here today, right? Is this Q&A. So let's run through it. And if you have any questions, if I'm not answering something, basically just post it in the Q&A. You can post anonymously, and then we'll go right through it and talk about it here in real time. So we're going to basically run through the questions that were pre-submitted. So some of you may have submitted a question, and we're going to start off with those. So they're all listed here for us to look at. So the Harvard Pilgrim breach, how can we prevent something like this from happening within our organization? So obviously this doesn't look great, and we haven't heard much, more than they were ransomed and their systems were disabled. So they posted a very brief notice on their website that said they took things offline as soon as they identified that they were ransomed, right? So we don't really have much information because it's so early, but we're going to assume, what we know. They basically were ransomed, and probably it came through via email. Somebody clicked on something that they weren't supposed to and downloaded something, and that's how it spread. But we're speculating. So let's talk about ransomware in general and what can we do to prevent something like this from happening. First, what happens when you get affected with ransomware? So this is going to be, you're going to have a financial loss. Obviously, that's pretty important. You're not going to be able to access your systems, your customers and vendors. They're not going to be able to get a hold of you or access critical data. There's a reputational damage that occurs as part of this. There's operational downtime. That's really important. And when your systems are offline, you can't really do anything. You can't use your revenue generating systems to conduct business because everything is offline. And then, of course, the legal implications, right? There's a lot of legal implications that come as part of this, regardless of being in healthcare or not. Of course, they're going to deal with all the HIPAA requirements and regulation around, that data being breached. But even if you're not in healthcare, everybody is required to disclose a breach when it happens in most states. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. You could lose sensitive data. That's important if things are not backed up, or if your recovery point objective doesn't align with what happened, the timeline of the attack or the breach, you could lose a period of time. You could have a period of time where you lose data. So what can we do to prevent it? So, really human security, we all are aware of like what the main products are, and we're going to talk about those, but human security is the most important thing. So making sure that everybody in the organization knows what they need to pay attention to. And that can be accomplished through various security awareness training products. We have different vendors that we work with, so not really specific to one vendor, but having a security awareness training program that you're completing on a regular basis. And if users are clicking on the phishing links, making sure that they're put through remedial training, it's really, really important to make sure that we're staying on top of this. We've recently had a client over sometime in the last couple of weeks, not with ransomware, but with just malware. And, they had an email that they had from a while ago that they had missed, and they opened the email. Sure enough, telltale signs of malware, ransomware. And if you learn those signs and you pay attention to it, you're probably not going to have these issues. So doing a security awareness training program and making sure, the most important thing is making sure that you're staying on top of it. We see a lot of customers purchasing security awareness training and implementing it, but are they staying on top of it? There are features in a lot of these platforms that allow you to assign, management access so they can view reports for their team. Are they actually completing the training? Because if they're not, then obviously there's no point in purchasing a security awareness training product. So that's really important. Also, I want to talk a little bit about zero trust in Azure Active Directory conditional access. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Azure Active Directory, but this applies to G Suite as well. So it's Microsoft or Google. Google calls it trusted access or approved access. Microsoft calls it conditional access. But really what this boils down to is taking an additional level of security here in addition to MFA. So we all know what multi-factor authentication is, and it's pretty much table stakes. You really need to have MFA. There's no exception for not having MFA on all your systems. But on top of that, having more of a zero trust framework and implementing Azure AD conditional access or G Suite, trusted access is really going to help you take things to the next level and prevent these things from happening. So let's use a phishing example. So somebody's got a Windows machine and they've got their Windows laptop on the network and they have multi-factor authentication and they've gone through security awareness training and they have an email filter and they've got pretty much most things are aligned with best practice. But an email makes its way through and the user clicks on it and sure enough, there's an incident. So the user gets phished in this case. So they click on the link and they get taken to a web page. Now we might think, okay, well, they have multi-factor authentication. How can they get phished? Well, they get taken to a web page, and from that web page, they're basically connecting to somewhat of a jump box. So the threat actor has a virtual machine that they've connected to, and now they're entering their credentials to say open a Microsoft document, and they believe they're opening a Microsoft document and they enter their credentials and they're actually logging in to an actual Office 365 session. Unlike in the past where the threat actors would set up a page that looks like Microsoft, this is actually using the Microsoft framework to steal their credentials. So they're taking their cache session. They're not really using their credentials because they can't get their multi-factor authentication code because it's multi-factor and they can't get to their phone, but they're stealing their session. So they're taking the cookies and cache from that session, dumping it on a machine and selling it to somebody to use. And that session, depending on your settings, could be anywhere from a couple days to a month. You could have somebody hanging out and sitting in your system on a cached session that you have no idea about for, weeks or a month. Naturally, this is a really big concern. And the best way to combat this is not multi-factor authentication. It's a requirement, right? We need to have it, but you really need to set up conditional access. So conditional access does require additional licensing. Typically on the Microsoft side, it definitely does. On the Google side, I don't believe it does, but you'd have to confirm with Google G Suite. But we'll talk a little bit more about the Microsoft side because, as I've said, they're pretty comparable. So let's say we want to set up conditional access on the Microsoft side. So we go into Azure Active Directory, we set up a conditional access policy, and we say only company trusted devices can access our systems. So now you've got an Active Directory domain, you have an Azure AD system, and you have a trust relationship between the two. So we're saying only hybrid joined devices can access Office 365 services. So if this user, going back to this person who was phished, if this user clicks on that phishing link and they get taken to that landing page, which is a jump box and it's an actual Microsoft session, they go to enter their credentials. The system says you can't access our systems from here because you're not actually on a company machine. You're on a third-party machine. So we've basically mitigated that risk entirely by making sure that the machine is a trusted machine, hence zero trust. We know the machine is a company machine. And typically only IT has the ability to add and remove machines into Active Directory and, basically a hybrid join device that's in Azure and on Active Directory. So, I mean, that's something you can do today to prevent this type of a breach if you don't already have it. Set up conditional access. It's really, really important. And we can talk more about that, and probably will talk more about that as we get through some of these questions. But it's a really good way to carve out what you want your users to have access to and where. And you can really customize it by location, by office, by IP address, by device, iPhone, Android, Windows, Mac OS, so on and so forth. You can really get very specific into what you want your policy to be. Having an email filtering solution. In this example, we said maybe the email filtering, maybe it's 99.99% effective, right? One or two emails, they're going to make it through at some point. So nothing is 100% when it comes to cybersecurity. So having an email filtering solution to cut out the majority of that, it's really important. We have all different email solutions that we work with, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Having endpoint detection, EDR and MDR. So a traditional antivirus is not going to really help in this situation. You want to have an endpoint detection and response and a managed detection and response solution. EDR plus MDR would be ideal. If that's not going to work in the budget, then EDR at a minimum would be a requirement. Most cyber insurance providers are requiring that you have EDR. And EDR is going to leverage machine learning and AI technologies to really stay ahead of things and not rely on the traditional signature-based antivirus. It's going to really pay attention to what the program is doing and what its intention is to rule out these issues. MDR is going to be basically somebody monitoring that. So the alert comes in and it maybe makes it past the EDR system. Well, the MDR is an actual human who's going to be looking at that alert and then quarantining that machine if they can't get the item quarantined. So it makes it through. They're not sure if it's been removed. They quarantine the machine and isolate the host so that you basically risk or inconvenience that one user, obviously to save the whole company, to save the rest of the network. So that's what you're going to get with the multi MDR solution. Having a DNS filter. Cisco Umbrella, there's a lot of different DNS filtering solutions, Barracuda. We have all different solutions that we work with, but having a DNS filtering solution at the network edge, if you're an institution that has a lot of devices behind a corporate firewall, having a physical DNS filter, or having a software DNS filter is going to be really important because you're going to be able to prevent a lot of these links. So they make it through the email, the user clicks on it. Okay, well, now the DNS filter catches it. So it's just, there's all different methods, but we want to encompass all of these items to make sure that we have a holistic solution to prevent these issues from happening. Having a good firewall, really important. Again, this is table stakes, like we all have firewalls, but paying more close attention to DNS, EDR, MDR, email, conditional access, those are the big ones. So let's continue to move on here. So we've got, what partners do you have for network security? Arctic Wolf, SIM, which is security information and event monitoring. Can we do DR with GCC High? Should we go for DR with VMware, Microsoft for Veeam, if we have those three programs? All right, so a few questions here. So let me run through these. So the first one is, what partners do we have for network security? So I'll list off a few. We've got Barracuda, we've got Sophos, Fortinet, WatchGuard, Microsoft, SentinelOne, KnowBe4, Cisco Meraki, and we are actually in talks with Arctic Wolf about a partnership. We're evaluating it, but we don't have that in place at this moment. SIM, what are we using for SIM? So SIM is Blue Mirror and Azure Sentinel. Those are the two SIMs that we typically work with. So what is a SIM? We should probably talk about it for anybody here that doesn't know what a SIM is. So security information and event monitoring. A SIM is going to take all the logs from all the systems, everything that we talked about, Barracuda, Sophos, Fortinet, whatever you've got in your network, it's going to ingest all of those logs, hundreds of thousands of logs a day, and it's going to filter them based on the MITRE framework. What's important, what's not important, what do we need to pay attention to, what don't we need to pay attention to, and then it's going to send those alerts to your security team or to us if we're providing this as a managed service, and then we can act on those. Can we do DR with GCC High? Yes, most DR solutions like Veeam or Barracuda are going to support GCC High. The GCC, the government cloud, GCCI is the government cloud with Microsoft. It's a specific cloud dedicated to government customers that need to have compliance with ITAR. So it's the same thing as Office 365. It's just in a separate system. It's just hosted a little bit differently. But yes, most backup vendors should have no problem communicating with it. You should confirm with the specific vendor that you're working with, but most should be fine. Should we go with DR with VMware, Microsoft, or Veeam if we have those three programs? And this is really, it's a customer specific answer, right? We want to learn a little bit more about your environment before we make a recommendation on any of these vendors because they all have pros and cons, right? So VMware offers a backup, Microsoft has backup, Veeam, Barracuda, we have all of these options available, but it really depends on your environment and it depends on a lot of different factors, right? Like if you have a lot of large mailboxes, maybe one vendor that offers unlimited storage is going to be better than the other. If you have a lot of small mailboxes, maybe you want to go with a vendor that, charges you by gig or by terabyte. So there's just different options there. Let me just take a minute here, see if we have any questions that have come through. So we've got a question here. Will VCA take the ability away from a user to use their mobile devices to access Microsoft services? So no, it's really up to you. So the conditional access policy is completely up to you what you want to set up. So you could say, all right, we're going to have a policy that applies to Windows. Let's say you've got almost all Windows machines in the organization. So you create a policy that only applies to Windows, or you create a policy that applies to Windows and Mac OS. By creating that trusted policy, you're really not targeting mobile devices. You're not targeting Androids or iOS devices, but you can create a separate policy that applies to Android and iOS devices. So, I mean, the options are really unlimited. Right? The options are unlimited. It's a matter of, what we want to think about setting up for your organization. But, some organizations will have 2, 3, 4 conditional access policies. Some may have 8 or 10. It just depends on what you're doing. So you might have a C-level or an executive policy that allows executives to do certain things with their mobile devices. And then you might have a separate policy for the sales team that allows them to do certain things. So you can really get very specific with these policies. It just depends on what makes sense within your organization. What are best practices for preventing, next question here, for preventing employees from leaving with trade secrets? So best practices. Setting up DLP policies within Office 365, that's something that can be done if you have the right licensing. If you're using SharePoint, there's a lot of file auditing that's built into SharePoint. So if somebody is typically trying to create, a backdoor for themselves and they want to share out a series of files with their personal email, that's like the most common thing that we see. They would create an external link to a document library and they'd add their personal email in there. And then they leave the company and their account is disabled, but their personal email has access to all of this data. So auditing that and paying attention to those files that are shared externally, that's really important. Maybe even preventing the ability to share files externally with any domain. Maybe you want to create a list of trusted domains and you have 4 or 5, key vendors or customers that you tend to interact with and sharing files back and forth via SharePoint. Then you want to add those in and create the policy accordingly. OneDrive could be handled a little bit different if you just have individual files that are in your OneDrive, but the company files, the core company files that multiple individuals are collaborating on and making changes, that's obviously what takes precedent. You want to pay a lot, closer attention to that because somebody could leave and then people are making changes and adding files and they still have access to it versus that individual's OneDrive, they're the only ones that are accessing it. So, when they leave, there's not necessarily new data being added in there, but there are policies and options and things that we can customize here to prevent employees from leaving with trade secrets. Conditional access helps with this because if we're saying, look, you can't access our SharePoint from your mobile device, you can't access OneDrive from your personal mobile device, you have to use your company laptop, then the chances of them accessing that data or syncing that data to a machine outside of your system is going to be significantly lower. So you can really mitigate this risk with conditional access. conditional access policies within O365 or G Suite. How should we handle lost and stolen laptops? So very similar to the last question. A lot of the same things should be applied, but a couple of things that we want to take into account. So we want to make sure that we're using OneDrive backup, which OneDrive backup includes desktop documents and downloads. So users save files on their desktop, they save files in their downloads, they're not on the server, or they're not in SharePoint. We want to make sure that's being backed up, and OneDrive can do that. So typically we set up a group policy, an Active Directory group policy, or a registry policy within, if you don't have AD or your Azure AD join, we can do Intune, but we set up a policy that says make sure OneDrive folder redirection is enabled. And the technology is called OneDrive folder redirection. If you look it up, that's what it's called. And it's basically going to automatically back up the machine. I mean, it's not the whole machine, but it's the most important items, the desktop, documents, and downloads. If users are saving items in the root of their C drive, definitely that's a bigger problem that needs to be looked into. But most of the time, it's desktop, documents, and downloads. And then encryption, BitLocker, should be enabled, and those encryption keys should be written to Azure AD so that you can recover if you need to. But at least this way, if the laptop is stolen, it's encrypted and somebody can't just pull the drive, connect to it, decrypt it, and access your company data. So making sure it's encrypted is definitely important in this scenario. I mean, the same applies for mobile devices. If your company has a bring your own device policy and you allow everybody to use mobile devices to access corporate email, they can maintain a copy of that data on their phone even if they leave the company. So if you're enforcing Outlook for mobile and they're using the Microsoft Outlook for mobile app, that data will be removed as soon as you block their sign in on Office 365. But if you allow them to use like the Apple Mail app on their iPhone, there's a cache that's stored on the phone. So even after you disable their sign in, they can still view some of those emails. So that could be applicable in this scenario where, their device is stolen or lost, but it can also be applicable if they're leaving with trade secrets, right? Because they have access to it on their phone. So conditional access, in addition to encryption, those items combined, used together, will really help with both of these items, really. What is the benefit to converting to a virtual environment for staff and faculty instead of cloud data storage? So this is trying to make sure I understand this correctly. Benefit of converting to virtual for staff instead of cloud data. So I'm assuming the question is more for like a VDI. And if you're able to clarify this in the Q&A, that'd be great. But I'm assuming the question is converting to a virtual environment, like a VDI type environment, instead of just using cloud data storage. So I will answer this based on that being the question with VDI. So VDI, some of the benefits there are going to be cost predictability, right? Being able to leverage commodity devices break, you don't really have to worry about imaging or setting up a new device because everything is in the cloud. And we do a lot with Azure VDI. So Azure Virtual Desktop is what we typically use for VDI, or we recommend, but there's a lot of other products out there. And if you're doing this on premise, there's definitely opportunity to leverage different solutions for that. Security, you have stale agents when you have a bunch of laptops that are circulating out there that you're not using VDI. So maybe you've got a couple endpoint agents that are corrupt, or you've got a patch that didn't go through, or there's just a lot of maintenance. There's a lot of daily maintenance that comes along with managing, a fleet of laptops. And when you're using VDI, those devices are always online. So from an IT perspective, IT admin perspective, they can be patched, they can be repaired, they can be rebuilt. You're reducing the risk factor of like having one or two laptops that don't have full protection because they're stale or outdated, or they didn't get rebooted because the user didn't want to reboot. They've been online for a month. So those are some really high level benefits of VDI. Let me see if we have clarification or another question. Staff and faculty using OneDrive on an assigned computer. If you could clarify that a little more, that'd be great, Kent. So I'm guessing if you're asking like multiple OneDrive accounts on a specific computer, how that would work. So that should still work. So the OneDrive redirection policy would be enabled on a group. It'd be a group policy that'd be enabled, and it would apply to users and computers. And then if user A is connected to the computer and they're signed into OneDrive, then their stuff would be synced and backed up to OneDrive. Same thing with user B. So it'd be just like their user folder on the machine that's already there today. The only difference is that it would be copied and synced up to OneDrive. So what that basically means is, let's say they have two computers, or let's say they roam around the facility. They log into another computer. That information is gonna follow with them. The files that are on their desktop on one machine is gonna be on the other machine. So it's very helpful for switching machines and upgrading machines because you don't have to transfer data. In IT, we often, we move computers, set up a user with a new computer, and is all the data on the server? Yeah, most of it is, right? But sometimes that's not always the case. And by using OneDrive and using this policy, you can make that process for your help desk a lot easier because they'll be able to just move right over to the new machine and sign into OneDrive knowing that all that data is synced. So it helps us quite a bit when we're dealing with users that have, 40, 50 plus gigs of data on their machine, but it's synced to OneDrive. So we don't have to wait for it on the new machine. We can just say, hey, here's a new machine. All your data is downloading from OneDrive and it will show up here, momentarily. If I didn't answer that question, please feel free to comment there and clarify that. How can we protect ourselves during use of work equipment at home? So definitely something that's important and that we see a lot of. So setting up DNS filtering is really important. But a lot of the same concepts that we talk about just in network, it's the same at home. Conditional access, again, really important because if somebody just has a home computer that they're just connecting to the work network on, you can't confirm that they have the right security software. So conditional access will help enforce your policy. If your company policy is you can't use a personal device on the company network, but you're not enforcing it via conditional access, obviously it could get abused. So when somebody logs in from their home computer, it might just be first to check webmail, once, and then they realize, oh, I have access to SharePoint. Or so now that becomes, signing into SharePoint, and now they have access to OneDrive. So that computer that is at home that's shared and unlocked and doesn't have a screen lock policy, now becomes the biggest risk to the company. So setting up conditional access is really important. DNS filtering, all of that, those are all really important items. We're moving away from VPNs, right? Having the ability to use SaaS solutions, and a lot of companies are moving away from having to require on, having a VPN for access, and conditional access helps check that box because you don't necessarily have to be behind a certain IP to be trusted. You just need to have a trusted device. So you're confirming that you have a trusted device there and not just a trusted IP. So I think we got most of these questions. Anybody have any other questions? Anybody that didn't submit questions? Because right now these are just questions that were submitted previously. So I know we still have some time here, so would love to continue. So, okay, we're trying to deploy security awareness training, but no matter how hard we try to explain the benefits, our staff is resistant and we are not able to force it. Yeah, very common problem. How are other people handling this? So I would encourage anybody here that is dealing with the same situation, that has the same challenge, to reply and to comment on this post. But I'll talk about how some of our customers are handling it. So a lot of, we have different types of customers that we work with, and in some cases we're providing the security awareness training program, but we're not managing it or maintaining it. In that situation, there's not too much that we can really do. But let's use an example of a client that has managed services with us. And so we're providing the security awareness training as part of our service offering. So we have like an autopilot program that we have for our managed service customers, and basically every 6 months we gather up internally our resources to find the best trainings that are available, and then we assign those trainings to the team. and we send monthly reports to the client to make sure that everybody is staying on top of it. I think for us, it's important because when we have security awareness training, we we want to make sure that the client is enforcing completing security awareness training for everybody in the company, because if that one person or 5% of people that haven't completed the security awareness training are the people that get compromised, that's a major problem for us, because a lot of times we're including remediating these issues as part of a managed service agreement. So it's in our best interest and it's in the client's best interest to make sure that they're completing these security awareness trainings. Some of our customers have, gamified this, right? Like gift cards. Whoever's the first to complete can get a gift card, or, creating a company, some type of, some type of enticement for the team, right? So everybody completes it, we're going to do this, or so it's really dependent on the organization and the company culture. I'd say really is really a big factor here. But I think making sure that people really understand what is the result of them not necessarily learning this, and knowing, what's going to happen as a result of them not having the information. It's very embarrassing for somebody to be that person at the company that clicks on the link and that gets infected, or that person that gets phished. Nobody wants to be that person, right? So I think playing into that is really important, because it's really ultimately what this all boils down to, is one or two people in the company can cause some major issues. But it's a great question. Great question. So let's see. How fast can you get back on their feet once they get hacked due to a human security incident if all security measures are in place? So it really depends what happened. So I guess we could use the Harvard Pilgrim, scenario, right? So we're just going to speculate a little bit. So how fast can they get back on their feet? So it depends what happened. It depends how many machines were affected. But like, let's say worst case scenario, okay? They have all the security software in place, but somehow somebody is able to get into their network. They have a domain admin account and they are able to get onto the VPN, and they're able to distribute software. So they get on and they distribute malware to every computer in the company, and everybody gets in the next business day, or this happens over a weekend, all their computers have ransomware. So because they were all triggered at once. And often what happens, these threat actors, really good ones, when they get in, they'll install, they'll download the file, but they won't execute it. They'll download the file, or they'll distribute the file, and they'll set up a scheduled task to run at a certain time. Maybe it's Sunday at 1 a.m. and then Monday morning, everything is offline. So how long does it take to get back on your feet? So it really depends how many computers you have and what your DR plan is, but it's really important to work with your internal teams and your legal teams to have a proper business continuity plan. So a lot of times we hear business continuity, DR planning, it's not just an IT plan, right? It's not just, okay, IT needs to, restore the machines. It's really a full continuity plan as to, while IT is doing what they need to do, what are we going to do as a business? How are we going to notify our clients? What are we going to tell them? Are we going to operate from a different place of business, or if a different location, excuse me, if our systems are down? So having a full disaster recovery and business continuity plan is really important here. And by creating that plan, you can reverse engineer that and estimate what your recovery time is. And based on that, you might make decisions and changes that have this, slider and security of what's the most convenient and the least secure, with the most secure and the least convenient, and finding where you want to draw that, drop that line. That's a battle, right? And figuring out what your recovery time is going to be, that may lead you to, creating specific conditional access policies and implementing certain security services to make sure that you can align with that. But it's difficult to say. Most of the time, in this scenario, if your user data is backed up on OneDrive, then we would just re-image the machines. So we would just wipe the machines, reinstall the operating system, rejoin the machines to the network, and run through the process. Could take days. It could take over a week. It really depends on what you have in your network. But if we're talking best practice here, it's probably going to take about an hour to 2 hours per machine to reload that machine. So that's really a general rule of thumb. We've seen companies that have been affected by ransomware, and they've got to reload all their machines, and it's you're talking a couple hours per machine. You got 300-400 machines. It's going to take a lot of time. And it really depends. So that's why trying to prevent these things from happening, obviously, is the most important, and preventing this stuff from getting in the first place. We talking about that scenario, like worst case scenario, all the machines are affected. We do a rotating password change for our admin accounts. So if we're managing a client environment, of course, you need to give us a password to manage the environment, but we're rotating that password every 24 hours. So even in some scenario where that password was compromised, it's only good for 24 hours. So if you can implement a password rotation and implement least privilege access within your organization, you can really help control these things from happening. A lot of times these issues are just a result of having an excess of administrators. Too many administrators on any one given system is not a good practice. If you've got a large IT team and you have, 6 or 7 engineers, they don't all necessarily need to have admin access to the same system. Maybe you can carve out, a couple of folks have access to one system, a couple of folks have access to another system. If you can do that, then you're implementing, least privilege, and you're putting yourself in a much better situation. But yeah, usually you're looking at a couple of hours per machine to reload the machine. If you are using VDI and you're in the cloud and your machines are in the cloud, then you can really just grab any computer and connect into the cloud environment. That is going to be much faster to recover from, because all of the configuration and all of the settings and the programs and the group policy, all of that is in VDI or in Azure VDI. So if your environment is compromised, it's going to be much faster to rebuild in the cloud. Policies in place to reload the machines via script or texting you to do the wipe and replace the machine OS one by one. Yeah, so following up to this, so typically in a ransomware type incident, we have to be, it's boots on the ground for the most part. We have somebody on site, and that's how we're working through this incident. We're getting to each machine, and we're not doing this remotely because we've at this point probably all remote access has been terminated. So we're going on site and rebuilding this with a flash drive, going to each machine and reloading the machine, or we're coming on site with like a PXE server, and we're booting into that environment so that we can image them over the network. That's an option. So there are ways to trim down the time. It just depends on the number of machines that you have in the environment. Also, cyber insurance, right? So you really should have cyber liability insurance. When these things happen, they have to be the first phone call. So you realize an incident comes up. The two things are you pull out your disaster recovery and business continuity plan. What are the first steps? Unfortunately, step one is always going to be to call your attorney and or your cyber liability insurance provider, because we have these policies for millions of dollars of cyber liability insurance, and you want to be able to use that in this type of a situation because it's expensive to recover from this type of an incident. So they have to be the first phone call, because you can't really talk to clients or vendors or notify really anybody until you've spoken with the cyber liability insurance company. We've had situations in the past where we've seen companies that have had issues and they don't reach out to the cyber liability insurance provider right away. Maybe they reach out to them after a couple days, because they're in crisis mode, and then the insurance company's like, "Well, you said the wrong things. You told these people that you were compromised, and you put this in writing. So now your coverage is, reduced to so and so." So reaching out to them first is important. Talking to your insurance agents and your cyber liability insurance company about what benefits they offer, That's important too, because a lot of times they have ways of assisting in these scenarios. So they might say, okay, look, we've got a call center, we've got 500 people that are behind a phone, and we can help you by notifying so and so, or we can help you by communicating with your team. So every insurance company is different, but you should talk to your cyber insurance provider to really find out what they're providing as part of your coverage, and you will find that they are actually providing a decent amount of services to help in these situations. It's not just, okay, there's an issue, we send them a copy of our bill, and then they reimburse us, or there's a lawsuit and we engage them and they reimburse us. No, they want to be involved from the beginning. So that's always going to be the first step. Any other questions? Alan, do you have anything to add? Any questions? Anything that I might have missed here? I think we covered most of it.
Thank you, Sean. That was very good, very informative. One last shout out for the Q&A. If anybody's got any questions they want to post in there. And I just wanted to remind you that we're happy to have Sean tell you how we are doing things, but for the collective benefit of everyone, we are hoping to have folks chime in with their solutions to the problems their peers are facing, since we are all in this together, just working at different organizations. We could benefit from, knowing what others are doing. For example, that question about security awareness training. I hear that all the time from towns, schools, and it's interesting to hear how different people handle different things. So we definitely want to get some feedback from you guys. I hope everyone who attended got something out of this. We're hoping to do these monthly and perhaps more focused on specific areas of concern from the feedback that we get from you guys. And before we sign off, I just want to thank you for attending and remind you to please fill out the survey that you're going to get later today. We're going to take those suggestions to try and make these webinars better for everyone. So again, thanks for everyone for attending. We're going to email this out to you. It's been recorded, and we hope that we can connect soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.